barco! Auto to barco!
Hello and welcome to another submarine chat. This one is going to be about narco submarines. I've been following this topic for about 10 years and amassed a database of 200 or more individual narco submarine incidents. So this chat is going to be just about the main types. If you see a narco submarine in the news, it probably fits into the 5 types of narco submarine I'm going to describe here. Like my other videos, this is unscripted, but I prepared some materials, so let's get on with it. Firstly, to clear up some terminology, narco submarine is a colloquial catch-all term for the purpose-built vessels that are used to smuggle drugs, typically cocaine, mostly from Colombia up in the Pacific to Mexico for onward supply to United States or across the Atlantic. The submarines themselves have also been known to travel across the Atlantic, and you get something very similar in Europe as well. Most narco submarines are actually not true submersibles. They don't fit the full description of a submarine. However, it's a useful term. So if you have anyone in the comments explaining what a real submarine is, you know how far into the video they watched. Narco submarines are much more common than we realize. I estimate that around 1,000 have been built, if not more. They're built in the jungles, typically in mangrove swamps like this one, in what they term an artisan boatyard. The materials are quite basic: fiberglass, marine plywood, and so on. They're built for a one-way trip. So they build it, launch it, do some minimal testing, then they load it with drugs and send it off on a one-way trip up to Mexico, typically. At the other end, it is scuttled. Some of them are interdicted by the US Coast Guard, Colombian Navy, and other forces. I have a database of about 200 incidents, and I've analyzed them, and that's what's going to form the basis of this talk. I have also written a book called Narco Submarines, so if you're interested in the topic, check that out. Also check my website out, Narco Subs 101, and actually quite a lot of articles on narco subs there. So there's 5 main types. Obviously, the people who build them don't tell us the names and categories and so on. However, from an external perspective, we can make observations about the designs and the trends and different categories. The first one is what we term an LPV-IM. This was actually the main type from about 2005 through to 2015, 2016. You still get them, they're not extinct. But they've been superseded by other types, which we'll come on to. LPV stands for low profile vessel, and IM stands for inboard motor. They're also known as SPSS, self-propelled semi-submersibles. That term is used in law enforcement in some quarters. It's becoming less common. In general, we term them LPVs and LPV-IM when we're being more detailed. They look like this. This is pretty prototypical, I'd say. Early on, there was more variation, and some of them had 2 motors, but they've more or less standardized on a single motor, a hull form that looks a lot like a sailing yacht, but without the sails and without the drop keel, obviously. The cocaine goes at the front, and it has a hatch in the forward deck. That hatch isn't always present, but it's usually the way they load and unload the drugs. The crew live in the center, sleeping on fuel tanks. There's a single cockpit with windows raised in the center, and the motors at the back. One interesting characteristic is the scuttling valve. These are used to sink the vessel when it gets to its destination and has been unloaded. Contrary to popular belief, it is not common to scuttle the narco submarine when it gets boarded by law enforcement. In the early days, it was more common. People wanted to destroy the evidence. However, it's illegal to simply be on board one of these vessels, regardless of whether the vessel is sunk or floats, and regardless of whether any cocaine is discovered. So sinking the vessel won't get you out of jail, but it does increase the risks of dying, obviously, and that's why people don't do it. The other thing they used to do is set fire to the vessel, equally dangerous. It's a good thing that they don't do it. Around about 2016, we started to see a new type of vessel, which was more like a go-fast boat or go-fast vessel with outboard motors, but was running semi-submerged. At first, we didn't quite know what this was, hybrid go-fast boat, that sort of thing. But we've now settled on LPV-OM. OM simply stands for outboard motors. They're also sometimes called LPGFV, so low profile go fast vessel. That's much less commonly used, I think, and also could be challenged to what extent they really are a go fast vessel. Designs vary, but one characteristic they all have is that the cabin is at the back. If we looked inside that cabin, it's invariably a stinking mess. This one has been interdicted by the US Coast Guard, and you can see the sort of living conditions. You'll also notice on the left, there's actually a bale of cocaine. In the center of your screen, there's a tunnel, and that leads forward to the cargo area. I think that they use this tunnel for sleeping, and they can also use it to move individual bales backwards and forwards to trim the vessel, so to affect the balance of the vessel when it's underway. It's also the main way to load and unload the vessel. Alternatively, you can cut the top open. They tend not to have a hatch on the top. At the far end of that tunnel is the cargo area, and it'll be jam-packed full of cocaine. The exact quantity varies. Typically, it's about 1.5 to 1.6 tons, metric tons, but it can be 3 tons or more. I think the actual quantity has more to do with the market and the needs of the cartel than the physical capacity of the vessel. Soon after we started seeing the vessels with the outboard motors, a new variation started to emerge. This looks very similar to the regular ones from the side, but actually, if you looked at it from the top, it's much narrower. It has a length to width ratio of about 10 to 1, and we term this a VSV, or very slender vessel. That is a generic term for vessels with this shape, and it improves the stability and efficiency when it's going through waves as opposed to over top of waves. So it's different from a speedboat that tries to plane over a wave. Inside, they're pretty similar to the ones that are not VSV. You have the cargo hold, you have fuel at the front and also at the sides beside the tunnel. You have the cabin at the back and the outboard motors and so on at the very back. Those outboard motors are typically going to be enduro 75 horsepower, 2-stroke, but it does vary. They're looking for something that's reliable and pretty ubiquitous, something that's easy to source and not easy to trace. The first 3 were the ones that we commonly see. Much rarer, but perhaps more interesting, are beasts like this one. At first sight, this looks like a regular low-profile vessel IM. You can see it's got an internal motor. You can see the exhaust coming out of the back there. It's viewed from the back looking forward, but the same vessel from another angle, you can see how long it is. They've essentially combined the VSV hull form with the internal motor layout. This is potentially the most stealthy of all the designs. It's quite rare though. This shows a contrast between the two. The bottom one obviously is the VSV. There's a story to both these vessels, actually. The top one happens to be one that was found in Spain and has crossed the Atlantic, and the bottom one happens to be the largest low-profile vessel that's ever been found, certainly by length, about 30 meters long. I suspect that they're built by the same person. Okay, the last category is the one that people are generally most excited by. Sometimes you find narco submarines that look like true submarines. We call these FSVs, for fully submersible vessel. The designs vary. They've only ever been found before they've been launched. Not a single one has ever been interdicted, which suggests that they're much more successful. I don't think they're as common as low-profile vessels, but clearly there's many more out there than we know of. They do share certain characteristics, though. The first one is the hull has to have a circular or generally circular cross section. That ends up looking like a sausage, a tube, just like a regular submarine. And for the same reason, it needs to be strong from all angles to withhold the weight of water. These only submerge a few meters, so they're not anything like a military submarine in terms of operating depth, but they still need to be completely watertight, built like a submarine. Some of them actually are fiberglass, which is quite interesting. The arrow points to the hatch. This will be a giveaway. If you're going to fully submerge, you need to have a very solid hatch, which is watertight. And so you see more elaborate circular hatches than you do on low profile vessels. If you see one which has got a square hatch, that implies that it's not fully submersible, although I'd be cautious of that. They also need hydroplanes of some sort, so these small wings which allow them to dive and surface again. This particular design had very large ones, but they're all going to have them of some sort. And they need some sort of propulsion power source. So a very large number of batteries would be typical. Some of them do have diesel engines, but they can't run those while they're fully submerged. An example one with a diesel engine is this one. As you can see, it looks like a submarine. This one actually is not fully submersible. It's what we term a snorkel sub. So when it's running, it uses its diesel engines and it doesn't have enough batteries to operate on its own. It needs to have the mast above water at all times. That mast also has a camera and navigation aids in this particular case. What I say though is that although it's not a true submarine because it cannot fully submerge, you would only know that if you analyzed it. So we don't have a different category for this because it's not visible from the outside that it's not a true submarine. Okay, hopefully that was interesting. So if you're interested in narco subs, check out my book, check out my website. I hope to do more videos talking about the most interesting examples, the history, the very early ones, the trends, and how they build them. Let me know in the comments what you think and what you'd like to know more about. Thank you very much.